Imagine going to jail for chewing gum or getting fined for owning a goldfish. Sound made up? It's not. Today, we're counting down 10 of the strangest, most unbelievable laws that are actually legally on the books somewhere in the world right now. And stick around to the end because we're also busting a few fake laws that everyone believes but aren't actually real. Let's get into it. Number 10. If you land in Singapore and reach for a stick of gum, stop right there, because you're holding contraband. Since 1992, Singapore has effectively banned the sale and import of chewing gum. Not chewing it, technically, but good luck finding any to chew, because you can't buy it, and bringing it in yourself can get you in serious trouble. So how did we get here? Rewind to the 80s. Singapore was building one of the most advanced public transit systems on the planet, the MRT. And almost immediately, people started sticking used gum onto train door sensors. Doors wouldn't close, trains got delayed. Vandals jammed gum into elevator buttons and keyholes in public housing blocks, and cleanup crews were scraping sidewalks constantly. For a government obsessed with order and cleanliness, gum wasn't a sticky inconvenience. It was a symbol of everything they were trying to engineer out of daily life. So in 1992, the ban dropped. And here's the part most listicles skip. It's not absolute. Since the early 2000s, following pressure during U.S. trade talks, Singapore quietly opened a narrow exception: therapeutic and dental gum. The nicotine replacement kind, or the kind your dentist recommends, can legally be sold, but only through a pharmacy, and often only with a prescription or ID on file. So, no, you can't grab a pack of spearmint at a convenience store. But this isn't some isolated quirk. It's a preview of an entire philosophy. Singapore fines people for littering. It fines people for jaywalking. It has, at various points, fined people for not flushing a public toilet. This is a country that treats the pavement like a shared living room, and it enforces that with real financial teeth. Whether you think that's authoritarian overreach or the secret to the cleanest streets in Asia, and Singapore's streets really are strikingly, almost eerily clean, probably depends on how you feel about rules in general. But the gum ban isn't an urban legend. It's real, it's still in effect, and it's the reason your connecting flight through Changi Airport is the last chance you'll get to finish that pack in your pocket. Guilty? Not guilty? You decide. Either way, spit it out before customs. Number 9. Picture this. Police pull you over, search your car, and find too many potatoes. That was real life in Western Australia for the better part of a century. Here's the setup. Back in the 1940s, Western Australia set up something called the Potato Marketing Corporation, a government body created to control the entire potato supply chain in the state. The goal, at least on paper, was to protect local growers from price crashes after the chaos of wartime agriculture. But the way it worked out in practice was almost cartoonishly strict. The corporation decided who could grow potatoes, how many they could grow, and who they were allowed to sell them to. Regular citizens were limited in how many potatoes they could legally possess or transport at once, because anything beyond a certain amount was assumed to be headed for the black market. And this wasn't a toothless rule sitting quietly in a dusty statute book. It had actual enforcement: inspectors, fines, confiscated produce. For decades, Western Australia effectively ran potatoes the way some countries run controlled substances, complete with a Spud Squad nickname that stuck around because, frankly, it deserved to. So why keep something like this alive so long? Because once an industry gets protected, dismantling the protection creates its own political problem. The growers who benefited from guaranteed prices didn't want a free market suddenly undercutting them, and undoing a decades-old regulatory body is never simple. It took public pressure, economic arguments about consumer prices, and a lot of, frankly, well-earned mockery before Western Australia finally scrapped the potato marketing scheme in 2021. 2021. Not the 1950s, 2021. Somewhere in Perth, someone born the same year as the first iPhone grew up in a state where hoarding root vegetables could technically get you fined. This is agricultural protectionism taken to its most extreme, most bureaucratic conclusion. Regulations so specific it named a single vegetable and built an entire enforcement apparatus around it. It's a great reminder that strange laws aren't always ancient relics from centuries past. Sometimes they're running in the background of modern life, right up until someone finally asks out loud, "Wait, why do we still have this?" Number 8. You've probably heard this one. In Switzerland, it's illegal to flush the toilet after 10 p.m. And I want to be straight with you right up front. That is not, and never has been, a real national law. There is no Swiss federal statute that criminalizes late-night flushing. If you go looking for the actual legislation, you will not find it, because it doesn't exist. So why does this claim refuse to die? Because it's rooted in something that is genuinely true, just wildly exaggerated. Switzerland takes noise seriously, more seriously than a lot of countries. Many Swiss apartment buildings and rental agreements include real, enforceable quiet hour rules, often somewhere between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., and again over lunch, restricting things like loud music, running appliances, showers, laundry, even hammering a nail into a wall. These rules come from tenancy agreements and building regulations, sometimes called Hausordnung, and landlords absolutely can act on repeated violations. Somewhere along the way, "Don't be loud at night" got flattened by the internet into "you can't flush your toilet," which is a much more shareable, much funnier, and much less accurate version of the truth. Could a genuinely inconsiderate late-night flush in an old building with paper-thin pipes technically annoy a neighbor enough to trigger a noise complaint under those building rules? Sure, theoretically, but that's a far cry from a law against toilets. This is what we'd call myth-adjacent, a kernel of real cultural discipline stretched into a headline that sounds more absurd than reality actually is. And honestly, that tells you something true about Switzerland anyway. A culture that takes quiet, order, and consideration for your neighbors seriously enough that outsiders assume it must be written into law. It isn't. But the discipline behind the myth? That part's completely real. Number 7. You've probably seen this claim floating around travel blogs. In Thailand, it's illegal to leave your house without wearing underwear. It gets repeated constantly in weird laws listicles, usually with 0 citation, 0 statute number, and 0 actual source. And when you try to trace it back to an actual piece of Thai legislation, you hit a wall. It's one of those claims that's everywhere online and nowhere in an actual legal code. So we're not going to sit here and tell you it's definitely true, because we can't verify it, and neither, frankly, can anyone else repeating it. What we can tell you is something far more useful and far more real. If you want to understand how seriously Thailand takes laws that outsiders might underestimate, look at lèse majesté. Thailand has some of the strictest royal insult laws on earth. Under Article 112 of the Thai Criminal Code, insulting, defaming, or threatening the king, the queen, the heir, or the regent is a criminal offense, and it's enforced. Not as some symbolic formality, but with real prosecutions, real sentences, sometimes shockingly long ones, applied to comments made online, in interviews, even in academic writing. Tourists have been investigated. Foreign visitors have been warned, formally by their own governments before traveling, specifically about this law. That's the gap between internet mythology and legal reality. A fake law about underwear generates clicks, while a genuinely serious, genuinely enforced law about criticizing the monarchy barely gets mentioned because it's less funny and more uncomfortable. If you're visiting Thailand, the underwear thing is not what should be on your radar. The line about the monarchy absolutely should be. That's the real lesson hiding underneath a fake one. Number 6. There is a real law in the United Kingdom about handling salmon in suspicious circumstances. I promise you, I am not making this up. It's Section 32 of the Salmon Act, 1986. And yes, that is its actual, real-world nickname among lawyers who find it as funny as you do. Read the phrase cold with zero context, and it sounds like a punchline, like something a comedy writer invented for a courtroom sketch. Your Honor, my client was in possession of a suspicious salmon. But the law exists for a completely serious, completely practical reason. Fish poaching and the illegal trade of stolen salmon was, and still is, a real economic problem in the UK, especially around prized rivers where wild salmon fishing rights are worth serious money. Poachers would catch salmon illegally, and the real challenge for prosecutors wasn't catching the fish thief in the act. It was proving where a salmon in someone's possession actually came from after the fact. So lawmakers wrote a clever, deliberately broad offense. If you receive or deal in salmon in circumstances that would lead a reasonable person to believe the fish was illegally caught, you can be prosecuted. Even without a smoking gun, without catching anyone mid-poach, based purely on the surrounding circumstances looking dodgy. It's a legal tool built for a genuine enforcement gap, and it's still cited in real cases today. What makes this one of the best strange law stories out there isn't that the government is absurd, it's the opposite. It's a great example of exactly how absurd sensible legislation can sound the moment you strip away its context. The law is doing serious anti-poaching work. It just happens to be doing that work with a phrase that sounds like a fever dream. So, next time someone tells you a law sounds too ridiculous to be real, remember, sometimes the ridiculous-sounding one is the one that's completely, provably true. Number 5. Turn on the radio in Canada, and there's a decent chance the song playing is there partly because the law says it has to be. Canadian radio stations are legally required to dedicate a set quota of airtime to Canadian content, commonly referred to as CanCon, under regulations enforced by the CRTC, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. Historically, that quota has sat around 35% during peak listening hours, meaning more than a third of what you hear has to meet specific criteria tying it back to Canadian writers, performers, or production. And this isn't some obscure technicality nobody follows. It fundamentally shapes what gets airplay in a country sitting right next door to the largest music market on the planet. Without a rule like this, commercial logic alone might flood Canadian airwaves almost entirely with music from the US and UK, simply because those catalogs are massive, already popular, and cheaper to license at scale. CanCon forces broadcasters to make room, and here's the payoff nobody expects from a regulatory quota. It worked. Artists who might have struggled to get airtime against international juggernauts got guaranteed exposure on home turf, built audiences, and some of them went on to become genuinely massive international stars. This isn't a niche policy nerds argue about at dinner parties. It's a structural reason Canada's music industry developed its own identity instead of just being absorbed into its southern neighbors. So, the next time someone says government regulation and creative culture can't coexist, point them to Canadian radio. A quota, on paper, is about as bureaucratic as law gets. In practice, it became a launching pad. Number 4. In a growing number of countries, wearing the wrong pattern of clothing can get you stopped, fined, or worse. And that pattern is camouflage. Across a wide swath of the Caribbean, Jamaica, Barbados, Grenada, St. Lucia, the Bahamas, Trinidad and Tobago, and others, civilians are restricted, sometimes outright banned, from wearing camouflage-patterned clothing in public. Several African nations enforce similar restrictions, and you'll find versions of this rule as far away as Saudi Arabia and the Philippines. Get caught wearing the wrong camo pattern as a tourist in some of these places, and customs can confiscate it right at the airport before you even clear the terminal. So why does something as simple as a clothing pattern carry legal weight? Because in many of these countries, camouflage is reserved, by law, exclusively for military and paramilitary personnel, and the restriction exists as a direct response to real, serious security concerns. If civilians can freely wear the same patterns as active-duty soldiers or police, it becomes dangerously easy for armed criminals, insurgents, or coup plotters to disguise themselves as legitimate military, or conversely, for genuine service members to be mistaken for threats in tense situations. In nations with histories of coups, civil unrest, or ongoing security concerns, that's not a hypothetical risk. It's a lesson learned the hard way, sometimes more than once. It's such a widespread rule that some fashion brands now specifically warn travelers before Caribbean vacations. Leave the camo cargo shorts and the trendy camo backpack at home, no matter how harmless they seem to you. What looks like a fashion statement in one country can look like impersonating a soldier in another. And that's the real thread running through this whole countdown. Context is everything. A pattern on fabric doesn't carry legal meaning on its own. It's the history, the security anxiety, and the real-world stakes behind it that turn a t-shirt into a confiscated item at customs. Number 3. If you own a goldfish in a classic round bowl, you might be breaking the law, at least if you live in certain parts of Italy. Several Italian municipalities, including Rome, have passed local animal welfare ordinances specifically banning keeping goldfish in small round bowls. And this isn't some vague suggestion buried in a pamphlet. It's written into actual municipal animal rights regulation, alongside other rules like restrictions on dying animals for Easter displays or requiring dogs to get daily walks. The reasoning is more scientific than it sounds at first laugh. A round bowl curves light in a way that distorts a fish's vision, meaning the goldfish is essentially looking out at a permanently warped, blurry version of its surroundings. On top of that, round bowls typically hold far less water and surface area than proper aquariums, meaning less dissolved oxygen and dramatically more limited swimming space for a creature that, in the wild, can live for well over a decade and grow far larger than most owners assume. So the ban isn't about aesthetics. It's a genuine welfare intervention, treating the round bowl as a design flaw that quietly shortens and worsens a pet's life. And Rome isn't operating in isolation here. This fits into a broader and honestly kind of remarkable European trend of surprisingly progressive municipal animal rights law. Cities passing hyper-specific ordinances most tourists have never heard of, protecting creatures most people assume have zero legal protection at all. A goldfish, in a bowl, protected by municipal code. If that doesn't reframe how seriously some governments take animal welfare, nothing will. Number 2. This next one isn't just weird, it's genuinely moving. In France, you can legally marry someone who is already dead. Posthumous marriage is real. It's codified in French law, and it requires direct presidential approval before it can happen. Here's how it actually works. A surviving partner petitioned the French Ministry of Justice has to demonstrate clear, documented evidence that the deceased fully intended to marry them before death. Engagement plans, shared life, sometimes even scheduled wedding dates interrupted by tragedy. And if approved, the President of France personally signs off on the union. And this isn't some forgotten medieval leftover. France has processed requests for posthumous marriage regularly since World War I, when so many young engaged soldiers died before they could marry their partners, sometimes leaving behind pregnant fiancés with no legal standing, no inheritance rights, no recognition as a spouse. The law gave grieving partners, and importantly their children, a legitimate legal and social status they otherwise would have been denied. Even now, in the modern era, France still receives dozens of these requests every year, and a meaningful number get approved. Most famously, in the 1950s, a French woman named Irene Jodard petitioned to marry her fiancé after he was killed in a dam disaster, and President Charles de Gaulle personally approved it, the case that helped formally establish this practice into modern French law. This isn't a wacky loophole for a punchline. It's one of the rare, strange laws on this list that exists purely out of compassion, recognizing love, commitment, and loss in a way most legal systems don't even attempt to. Strange? Absolutely. But strange doesn't always mean silly. Sometimes it means humane. Number 1. Time for a lightning round through America's weirdest local ordinances. And a quick, honest disclaimer before we start. Almost every single one of these comes from old, hyper-local town code, not state or federal law, and enforcement today is essentially zero. Nobody is getting arrested for these, but they're real entries in real municipal code books, and that alone makes them worth a look. First up, Arizona. Multiple small-town ordinances on record technically prohibit donkeys from sleeping in bathtubs. This traces back to a real, almost unbelievable incident in the town of Kingman, where a pet donkey reportedly fell asleep inside a bathtub. The tub's foundation gave way, and the donkey ended up sliding downhill inside the tub itself. City officials, apparently unwilling to repeat that experience, wrote a rule to make sure it never happened again. Next, Connecticut and the pickle rule. A widely repeated claim that, by law, a pickle isn't legally a pickle unless it can bounce. This one traces back to an actual 1948 case where two Connecticut pickle packers were caught selling spoiled, unsafe pickles, and state regulators reportedly used a literal bounce test as one practical way to check pickle firmness and quality during an investigation. It's less a standing law you could be arrested for violating, and more a colorful piece of enforcement folklore that hardened into an urban legend over decades. And finally, Las Vegas on Fremont Street, where hula hooping is genuinely restricted, and this one is verifiably real and still enforced. It's not random governmental humor. Fremont Street gets extremely crowded with pedestrians, street performers, and vendors, and a spinning hula hoop in a packed walkway is a legitimate trip and collision hazard. The restriction exists as straightforward pedestrian safety regulation, dressed up as one of the internet's favorite wacky Vegas law jokes. Old, obscure, barely enforced? Sure. But every single one of these started as someone's very real, very specific problem. So there you have it. 10 real and a few fake laws from around the world. From gum bans to potato quotas, from suspicious salmon to marrying the dead. The line between too weird to be true and actually on the books is a lot blurrier than you'd think. Which one shocked you the most? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more strange facts like this every week, hit subscribe. Trust me, it only gets weirder from here.
Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe. You love it. You love it. You love it.